to get really general, money and credit, debt, economics, finance, it's all about trust, isn't it?
Well, this is the one of the main areas that people get confused about is what is money. You'd think that would be something which economists would have worked out by now, but because they decided money wasn't important, they pretty much ignore what it is. And in fact, the conventional treatment of money literally regards it as something that falls from the sky. You heard the expression helicopter Ben?
Let's not talk about what it isn't. Let's
Okay,
talk
well,
about what it is.
That's where they've confused us. So, from my point of view, money is fundamentally about trust. And I'm not an anthropologist, by the way. What I'll be talking about and saying where it came from and why it began as trust and it still is fundamentally about trust. If you want to see the original research on that, then people like David Graeber and Michael Hudson are the people to look in, not me. And I probably make some errors in talking about what they've seen as how money evolved. But fundamental start of human relationships actually is trust. If you think about where we came from as a species, the fact that we are a collective species rather than being isolated individuals. We're not leopards in how we behave towards each other, or I forgot much picture of it. Cat species as independent hunters. We don't behave like that. We're part of a pack. We're a pack animal. And a large part of why we work together is trust. Of course, with the intelligence we've got, we can really stuff things up much better than those animals can. So we have complex arrangements of trust. And it appears that the way that human society first managed to manifest the capacity to exchange things, which was where money's fundamental role these days is exchange of objects and ownership of objects, that is regarded as having started in mutual gift relationships. Be part of a small community. The biggest size early Cro-Magnon societies were apparently about 150 people. So you'd know everybody in that community. And I just made the analogy with the conversation with Aaron earlier that if Aaron had a nice looking club, he's a good maker of clubs. I'd say, oh, that's a nice club. And Aaron would say, have it. Give it to me. Oh, I said, oh, no. It says, no, you have it, you have it. Oh, okay, thanks. And then I might be a pretty good fisherman, which I'm not, and I'd go out and catch a particularly nice sturgeon, and I'd come back and walk over to Adam's hut, or
Aaron's hut.
Pardon me, Aaron. Aaron's, I'm having an argument with Adam right now, it's getting confusing. Aaron's hut and say, have some sturgeon. Oh, you shouldn't. No, I insist. Boom. So there's a sense of mutual exchange and trust and obligation that bonds people together. And when you have 150 people, you pretty much know most of us can hold the personalities of 150 different people in our heads. And the thing is, there'll be somebody else in the tribe who comes over and says to Aaron, oh, nice club. And Aaron says, have it, sure. The guy walks away and never does anything back. And he does it with somebody else and somebody else and somebody else. And finally think, don't give it to that bugger. Let's call him Adam. Can't trust Adam. He won't reciprocate. So Adam gets to join up with his other couple of mates, Bill and a few others, and I'm being a bit nasty here, but still. I should throw in another name. What about Fred?
On YouTube, there'll be this
Yeah,
little
I
comment
know.
that says...
Who's he talking about? Yes, I know. And they become a collective in which they themselves have their own little innate group of trust. So that's, 3 of the 150 have their own little network, and nobody talks to them. 147 we all exchange amongst ourselves. And the house tends to work. So it's a mutual obligation. We all maintain this web of credit in our heads, which is our sense of mutual obligation to each other. So that's really where human exchange began. Again, I'm going to divert from what you've asked me to do and say what neoclassical economists think. They've always thought it was about barter, working out that it took Adam 10 hours to make the club, it took me 20 hours to get the sturgeon, so I give Adam half the fish in return for the club. And that barter in mentality is what economists have enforced in how they think about the role of money, right from Adam Smith actually using that expression. And again, speaking of people you should read about this, David Graeber's book does a very nice job of talking about how Adam Smith perpetuated a myth of barter as the origin both of human commerce and human society.
When you say barter, what do you mean by barter?
Well, barter is saying that club took you 10 hours to make, it took me 20 hours to catch the fish, therefore that club's worth half a fish, here's half a fish, give me the club. That sort of...
It didn't start that way, though.
It didn't start that way. No, it's a myth economists have that it did start that way. And one of the very useful things that David Graeber's book, and basing himself largely on the research of Michael Hudson, is to say that and Cornelia Wunsch, who've done some of the best anthropological research, to say that's not how it started. When we look at our early records of Cro-Magnon exchange, which, when the anthropology comes up there, again, the clan of the cave bear is fairly well based on that. You'll find a lot of gift exchange behaviour in that book, and that's well founded. But even looking at the early writings about exchange, it wasn't barter based, it was credit based. So credit was actually the origin of money. It wasn't that barter became coins, became money, which is the way conventional people think about it, conventional economists. It was credit changed its nature over time to become what we have today. So trust has always been an essential part of that. And again, I'm going to be a bit of pop anthropology here. I don't know this research from my own. I'm doing second and third hand, so I can make errors here. But it appears that once you get beyond about 150 people, it's not possible for us to maintain in our heads that knowledge of who you can and can't trust. That tends to be about the limit of our society. People break away at that stage. So you've got groups of about that scale, which appear to be the size of early Cro-Magnon societies. But of course, then they'd become different tribes, and you would know, generally speaking, that a particular tribe was trustworthy. So again, a trust relationship could occur between tribes, but more mediated by seniors or women's councils and things like that. So again, even at a larger network of exchange now, we're talking about larger interacting communities. Again, trust was an essential part of it. But then what you do, you'd personalise that other group. So you wouldn't talk about, Aaron versus Fred. Aaron you can trust in your group, Fred you can't. You'd start talking about the Azerbaijani tribe that you can trust, and the Orthodox tribe you can't really trust, So you'd personalise them, and there'd be a limit to how far you could go even with that in terms of how many different large groups that you could personalise as an elder or a women's council member. It was actually apparently the women's councils that did most of the decisions again. It wasn't the warriors who made those decisions. That gave you a limit to just how far that customary society could evolve. And of course we had military conflict evolving. We're not exactly the world's most peaceful pack animal. So militaristic structures start to evolve. Larger groups than 150 formed together by territorial conquest and so on. And then you don't have that same capacity for individuals to maintain a web. And what appeared to be the basis of the web of credit became the religious beliefs. The churches, whatever they were, and of course we're talking pre-Apollo here, we're not even forget about Jesus, we're way back in antiquity. The beliefs you had about gods and so on were what you shared on a larger scale than 150. And then the whatever that church-style institution, which was not just a religious thing, it was also commerce, that became the repository of knowledge. As language evolved and writing evolved, they had written records of what was owed. And they would be...
Let's stop just there for a second. We'll continue from there.
Yep.
Going back to the club, which
Yep.
I gave you, and the fish, which you gave me.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what does credit and debt mean in that situation.
Well, mutual obligation.
Okay, so when you ask for the club, you get
No, I didn't ask for the club. I said I admire your club.
Okay.
And you say I'll give it to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but in my mind, at that point, I have credit.
Effectively, yeah.
With
yeah.
you in
Yeah.
particular, but maybe with the community if there are a bunch of people
Yeah.
around us.
That's recognised. People know that's happened. Oh, you've got Aaron's club. Yeah, you gave it to me.
So I have credit at that point.
Yeah, yeah,
And you have debt.
yeah.
To me in particular, but to the community perhaps
Which
also.
is recognised. The community can see that exchange has occurred and know that it's been a gifted exchange. And you give, there is an innate altruism to humanity. I'm sure you've seen enough demonstrations of that where you haven't been in Wall Street. And that altruism is part of what bonds us together as well, but it's certainly not an altruism that is non-reciprocal. It's a reciprocal altruism. If you don't actually reciprocate it, then you'll get excluded.
So my point here is that credit and debt arise naturally from exchange, even in a gift economy.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say from exchange. That arise from the fact that we're in a community. And again, one thing I will give Adam Smith credit for is talking about specialisation. and people would specialise in particular skills. You'd be a good napper.
Napper?
Stone napper, making stone, cutting stones in various ways for axes and blades and spears. You'd be a good gatherer. You'd be a good hunter, etc. You'd be a philosopher who can manage to handle disputes amongst people. You'd be an entertainer. So that would mean that you would necessarily be relying upon other people's skills in the system.
For food.
So, yeah, and that's part where the whole community strength came from. So I wouldn't say it comes out of exchange. I'd say it comes out of the fact that we're a pack animal that makes things. In fact, fundamentally, it comes out of the fact that we produce. So if you look at a bunch of lions, I mean, they share the kill. No two ways about that. Whereas I think it's cheetahs don't. They just kill and eat independently. We're similar. We share the kill, so to speak. We also share the make, and that makes it much more complex because then, we don't all go out and kill the same wildebeest or attack the same group. We're gathering different things together. So the fact that we produce really is the foundation of the fact that we need to exchange.
And in the process of exchange, this sense in our head of
credit and obligation, yeah.
Credit and obligation, so debt's obligation really, kind of, a sense of obligation.
Yeah.
And in a gift economy, credit can fade over years. Like if you asked for the club and I give you the club, and I feel that you feel that you owe me something, and I feel that you owe me something, but after a year or 2 years or 3 years, lots of time has passed, and that obligation, that credit and debt kind of fades away into the future.
Well, if there's been a series of reciprocations over time, they will. If you've given something to somebody and they've never reciprocated back, you'll bear a grudge.
Right.
Okay. And that will be part of a social discordance in the group, and it'll be talked about, and so on and so forth. So it's expected that there's a continuous process of those exchanges because that's part of what maintains a community. And if somebody doesn't do it or whatever else, they're likely to get slowly excluded from the group. Again, I'm being a pop anthropologist here. I'm not my specialty, but that's the picture that I've got from people whose work I respect. And I can make mistakes in recording. I do always say, if you want to learn something, go to the original source, and that'd be David Graeber, Cornelia Wunsch, and Michael Hudson on this issue.
I think what I'm trying to get to is, in a gift economy, if there's exchange going on and people have a sense of credit or debt and it builds up over time, that they owe to the community and that they expect from the community both, that if someone dies, for example, or if someone leaves the tribe, or even if a long period of time passes, you can't remember every exchange that you've ever made.
No.
So in the current system, debts are a very particular number, and that number stays the same for years and years and years and years and
compounds.
years.
So we've had an evolution of the nature of credit. We've gone through money phases, obviously, and coinage and so on. And again, the research from Graeber and Hudson and Wunsch implies that coinage actually evolves when we cease trusting. In the level of social conflict and violence, it's so great that you no longer expect obligations to be honoured, and so you want a physical manifestation in some sense of an exchange, and
Is
that's
this
where
the
coinage
church
evolves.
where we left off?
No, it's more. Then you got to go through the militaristic societies, the rise of empires.
Let's go back to the church then.
Yeah, okay. Well, at the church stage, the church is maintaining those records.
Which records?
Well, records of who owes what, because you've got scribes who you'll gift to the church, or you'll give to somebody else, or there'll be some exchange, and the records of those exchanges written down. So a lot of the cuneiforms, with the earliest forms of writing we've found, again, the expert in that is Cornelia Wunsch. You can actually read quite easily cuneiforms and apparently speak the language. That those cuneiforms recorded who owed what and so on, what the obligations were between people, and written down. She actually found just recently the world's first ever divorce contract. Quite remarkable. You were free to go your way after some set of exchanges. So the repository of that knowledge of credit and obligation became the church, and the church was a much broader institution than we think about today, like a melding of a production system, religious observance, and to some extent enforcement of social rules. So isn't something you can say was separate from the state. It's a mixture of state and church.
Then what happened?
Again, read the originals, but having said that caveat, it appears that as those societies get larger, then the state itself maintains an external army. It's got its retinue, the largesse for the king, who's seen as being closer to God than the rest. The hierarchical society evolved from that very communal society we began from, and in that hierarchy, you've got to maintain your retinue. You have to impose taxes, and therefore, when coinage evolved twofold, coinage seemed to evolve when you had a breakdown in trust. You're likely to have robbery and stuff like that, so and people aren't going to honour their obligations, records aren't going to be maintained, so coinage evolved in that sort of circumstances. And then the government could use the coinage, or the sense of obligation that entails, as a form of demanding tax. You had to pay your tax in coin, or tax in the recognised legal tender of that society. And therefore, the legitimacy for the coin came from the fact it could use to pay taxes with it. Now, there's a particular group of people called the chartalists who I think make too much of that. But that particular phase...
Chartalists?
Chartalist.
Chartalists.
Yeah, chartalist. Yeah.
That's a group of economic thinkers.
Yeah, non-neoclassical economic thinkers,
They make
with whom
too
I have
much-
some conflict.
They make too much of coins.
They make too much of that role, the fact that the money being given legitimacy by the fact that it was used to pay taxes to the state. That's why I'm quite pleased to have seen David Graeber's research to go back much earlier than that and say that initially it was systems of mutual credit and obligation, out of which that coinage stuff evolved, rather than saying we started from coins and then invented credit later. So again, the conventional in understanding is the wrong way around in terms of how money evolved. It began with that sense of credit, back in the Cro-Magnon gift economy days. So we get to the stage anyway where coins have come along.
So I have a coin.
Yeah.
And the reason it's valuable to me is because if you come to me as a tax collector, you're either going to do violence
Bash me up or
the coin. So the coin at this point represents security from violence.
Yeah, that's not a bad way of putting it. Because you now got state-ordained violence, of course.
Okay. So then what happens?
Well, an enormous long period of fluctuation between credit systems and coinage systems. Whenever the increase in conflict, military conflict and violence, would normally see a rise of coin over credit. And again, this is looked to Graeber's work in particular on this, but that preceded for a period of about 1,000 years. You're going from the Roman period, the Greco-Roman period, right through to the collapse of the Roman Empire, where after the Roman Empire's collapse, in some sense the credit systems re-evolved, and people would actually use the Roman coins, which no longer had any military force backing them, as...
No taxation or anything?
Well, there was, I expect there was taxation. It would have likely been the feudal system evolving that institutionalised the taxation in the sense that you have serfs who are part of the land, and as part of the land they are required to work the land to survive themselves, but also to provide for the lord. So you've got a way in which this feudal fief became the new way of imposing the taxes, in effect, was simply saying as a serf you were required to work 50 days out of the year, when you'd work a total of 150 to 200 on the lord's land rather than on your own land. And then what you produced for the lord became the basis of the lord's capacity to have retainers and military force and so on. So there was a change in the nature of the credit systems of the feudal system. But of course feudal systems were fighting with each other all the time. And there were merchants. So the feudal system couldn't survive without trade. There were merchants as well. So you had to have some system which would work through a range of feudal fiefs, and the Roman coins would do that, and other forms of coinage as well. So the fact that you had commerce occurring over a large distance, where you had to have something which would be used, respected in a range of different societies, then I think the coinage was the thing you could carry with you that would do that and be recognised over a huge distance.
Let's talk about inherent value of the coins at that point. So
yeah,
let me summarize. So the coins at that point, people see these as valuable for because their grandparents said they were valuable, their parents said they were valuable, their entire life they've agreed, the community, people have always accepted them in trade. They've always worked. And so they become kind of tokens of trust, or...
Again, custom. Custom becomes part of it. And the fact that they are recognised and accepted across the range.
So
works, yeah.
they are not, it's not because the coin is valuable for the metal content.
No. Yeah, and of course...
So they're really fiat at that point.
In effect, yeah, they're really fiat. And again, that's the role, the way in which money and the state are embedded in each other in various ways turns up at that stage.
Okay, so then what happens?
A whole range of other changes, that sometimes you had such a degree of conflict that it then did come down to the value of the coin, the gold in the coin or so on. And you notice, you look at your coins, there's a rim around the outside. The rim around the outside is, if you actually chip a bit off, it's obvious you've actually taken some of the content away. That evolved to stop people cheating by having 1 ounce of gold or 1 ounce of silver and turning it into a couple of grams less because they've sliced off a bit of the edge and flattened it out so it looks the same. Well, of course, that would ruin the rim. So the rim was an anti-counterfeiting device in a period when coins were dominant. But you then we're slowly progressing out of what was called the Dark Ages, which may actually be not as dark as we historically believe it to be. But you get to the stage of the Renaissance developing, and you have houses like the Lombard house in Italy becoming people who store the coinage you have, the gold, whatever that you have, and who will issue a certificate to say it's being stored with them, and you can trust them. Again, we're coming back to trust again. So the fact that you've got the gold there means you don't have to carry it with yourself, or your wealth is stored somewhere where it's safe, you won't get attacked.
The coins.
The coins, the gold, the whole... again, I'm not strong on the detail of it at that time, but certainly coinage should be part of it. Then...
I'm just saying that it's coins that are being held.
Yeah.
And it's paper that's now being exchanged.
Paper is being held onto as a record that you've got that stuff at the Lombards, but then because everybody trusts the Lombards to keep honest records, then ultimately you can say, well, Aaron, I want that sword now, and we both know it's worth so much of these particular coins, so I'm going to give you a certificate saying, please, to take this to Lombards and transfer the ownership of so many coins of mine, 13 Roman coins or whatever, to you, and you take it to the Lombards and they say, okay, we recognise the signature, here you are, we'll transfer the ownership of that, which we're keeping a ledger of, we don't actually physically move them, a ledger to say it's been transferred from Steve to Aaron. Okay? Now, the great innovation at that stage, because of the degree of the trust, you could then have Aaron signing it over to somebody else. And then ultimately got the idea of an ore bearer.
So we're talking about a check right now.
We're talking about checks, yeah. And that became the form of credit and trust at that stage, that rather than buying by, in some actual or virtual sense, exchanging the coins, you're now exchanging a promise to pay drawn on an institution, which is what evolved into our banking sector. So fundamentally, banks, again, what you're exchanging when you buy something is the promise to pay of the bank. And now the trust is embodied in the bank rather than the community.
So how do we get to like a $1 bill from that?
Well, that again, I'd say read Graver and Hudson rather than me. But there's a whole period where the state then gets involved in this role of issuing. So the Lombards may have started off, and I'm saying may, I don't know for sure, may have begun that process of issuing the all-bearer check, but ultimately...
All-bearer check, what do you mean?
Or a certificate saying, pay Aaron or bearer.
A set amount?
A set amount, that's right.
One?
Well, it would be initially, when I'd write out a certificate, it would be whatever arbitrary amount I put there. But ultimately the state then, again, we've still got, massively military state, retinues, all the ostentatious wealth of that period. The king has to maintain it, taxation is required, and they tax in an instrument that the state says is valid, and it may be handled and stored by the Lombards and processed by the Lombards, but it's the note, the lira, let's go back to the Italians, is a lira of this particular Italian principality. And then you start getting the evolution of notes at that stage. And so the notes, that's where, again, the charterist argument comes to the fore, because at that stage, surely, as well as issuing the notes, the government is also insisting that it gets paid its taxes in the notes. So you've therefore got to earn the notes. Okay? So the structure of commerce evolves out of that as well.
So how from that do we get to like mortgages and credit cards?
Well, banking is therefore a mixture of what the state creates, the fiat money, and what the banks create, which is credit money. As I explained yesterday, I regard those as two independent means of creating means of payment, which are both recorded in the same vernacular, which is whatever the legal tender is of the community. So the banks can create $1 million by issuing a loan. The government can
Based on our trust.
Based on our trust. The government can create it by running a deficit.
Based on the entire nation's trust.
Yeah, and so those two independent ways you can add to the amount of money in circulation. With obviously a dynamic relationship between the two, which has been again massively misunderstood, but those are the two sources. So ultimately, as well as when you now got to look at the role of the banks in extending loans. Where mortgage comes from is the bank saying, well, we're going to make a positive entry in your bank balance and also make a positive entry in the amount you owe us. And the debt. And just in case you don't honour it, we're going to write a contract, which means that if you fail to honour it, then we take this particular asset. And my partner pointed this out to me. I didn't know this. She looked it up. Mortgage actually stands for death contract. Okay? Yeah, good one, isn't it? So that is the backing up the fact that it's given you that money. Now, I want to make one point here too, which is a bit of an aside, but I think it's an important one. People normally, who do you think's the buyer when somebody takes out a mortgage? You've got a person taking out a mortgage from a bank. Who's the buyer? Who's the seller? Who thinks the person taking the mortgage is the buyer? Who thinks the bank is the buyer? You're right, because what the bank is buying is a promise to pay from this person over time in the future in return for money now. So the bank is saying, here's $1 million, and you're welcome. You're welcome. It's American way. The way people say you're welcome. That is saying, I've now bought from you the promise to give me $1,000 a month for the next 25 years. So the bank is buying off you. And of course, in my opinion, one part of when you get the ludicrous growth of debt we've had recently, where banks have been, financing gambling and committing fraud and doing it too quite frequently, and robo-signing and stuff like that. I would like to impose caveat emptor on that, buyer beware. If you were so stupid as to buy the promise off this bloke, he's going to give me $1,000 a week for the next 25 years. You don't deserve.
You don't believe me, Steve?
I don't believe you, no. Well, I nudge, wink, wink, I believe you so I can gamble a bit, but really I know you haven't got the capacity, but if I buy this and I sell it to this bloke over here who actually trusts me, poor idiot, then I can get it off my books and make a bomb, That's what's going on. And then they say they then try to stand behind the trust they violated themselves. And they then say, well, it's because, you've signed a contract with us and you therefore have to live to the contract. And you say, but you were buying a promise off me, you should have known I didn't have the capability of... In fact, you know better than I do.
You're not very clever, are you?
I'm a dumb bank. I've got 300 PhD students. You're a bloke chewing the corn down in some farm in Iowa or somewhere.
Thanks, Steve.
That is ludicrous to blame the person who takes on the loan for the fundamental illegality and fraud of the exchange. And I would rather say that banks are trying to hide behind being lousy buyers. Well, long time ago, Roman law and civil law developed the concept of caveat emptor, buyer beware. And if you're stupid enough to buy that promise, then tough luck, and you don't get the right to enforce it by taking the person's property. That's one of the line I'm going to be pushing a lot.
So the bank is the stupid one in this case?
Yeah, the bank is deliberately stupid, so it should deliberately pay for it. not be able to back up that mortgage. So that's one of the reasons I'm in favour of saying...
So are you saying it should not be able to take the house?
Yeah. If the bank actually did legitimate investigations, seriously worked out what it thought your income earning capacity was, gave you a loan that was based on what you could really sustain as the income, then in that case it's done a legitimate buy, you've conned it out of it, and the contract should be enforceable. But if the bank does pardon the Australian expression, bullshitted its way through the whole thing, then it shouldn't be able to stand behind the security attaches to it. And we're now taking a short pause for our sponsors.